Hello everybody, welcome back to Reaper Minis TV. We're going to get right into reviews this episode, starting off with two new additions to the Icingstead army for Warlord. The first figure is a Yeti Warrior, and it's about the size of an ogre. It's a two-piece miniature where you have the whole right arm as a separate piece, but it fits right into place up at the shoulder. Not really any problems there. I really don't foresee you needing to pin it or anything like that. And as you can see, most of the miniature is covered in fur except for his claws and a little bit of his feet, and the really kind of ferocious expression on his face where it looks like he's yelling or bellowing forward, right about to take a chunk out of somebody. But the fur detail across the whole miniature is very consistent and well done. And this is the second Yeti Warrior that's been released for Icingstead, so you can have a little bit of variety in the army. I could also see maybe using these in an Ogre Kingdoms army in Warhammer Fantasy Battle as Yetis in that army too. So either way, Yetis in Warlord or Yetis for a Warhammer army, or also as Yetis in a role-playing game in any kind of cold-based encounter. So this newer Yeti Warrior or the previously released one are both really good, clean models and should serve you well. Next up for Icingstead is a Barbarian Berserker. This is a single-piece model, and you can see from the video there's going to be some cleaning necessary. There's a little bit of extra metal from the casting process that runs down from his right hand down to the casting tab itself, so just carefully clip that off. He didn't need a whole lot of other cleaning. There were a little bit of bits of flash on the model towards the axe heads, but not really much else, and not much of a visible mold line as far as I could find. He's not wearing much in the way of armor, but what he does have on is limited to furs. He has long hair and a fairly full beard, carrying two axes like you see, and they're a little bit unique. They're not your normal metal axe heads, but they look like either they're big pieces of stone that have been ground down or shaved down to use as axe heads, or they could be really large and shaped pieces of super hard ice that the Icingstead barbarians use as their axe heads, but they might look cool as big hunks of ice on the end of the axe if you wanted to paint them up that way. Okay, now getting into the Dark Heaven Legends line, we start off with a blister that has two small creatures in it, and you also get two flying stands with this blister. The first one looks like a brain that has a bunch of tentacles coming off of the end of it. The second one just looks like a mass of tentacles, and the first thing that I thought of was to be able to use these as alternate spore mines in a Tyranid army for Warhammer 40k. You could also use them, and I think this is the more intended use, as fell taints in D&D 4th edition. They'd be perfect for that. That's pretty much exactly what they look like. And I think an enterprising GM in a horror or superhero game might be able to find a use for them also. Next up is a miniature that was part of a design your own miniature contest that Reaper will do from time to time. And this is a female ranger that's carrying a sword and also a hammer. She has a large backpack on that has some pots and pans and some pouches on her belt. And she's wearing leather and padded armor. Now, the only thing for me that seems a little bit off is how she's holding the hammer in her right hand. It seems like she's almost holding it up as maybe a warning or using it as some kind of spell component or something like that, but that doesn't even really seem right since she is a ranger. But it just, the way she's holding it seems a little off with the open palm of her hand facing forward, how she's holding the hammer. So maybe it's just me. I think that if you wanted to, you could very easily convert the miniature to where she's holding it posed a little bit differently. It's nothing that takes enough away of the miniature for me to say that it's not a good miniature, because it's a very well sculpted miniature, and it's cool that Reaper does these design your own miniature contests every once in a while. But for me, I would probably do a conversion on the right hand just to alter it a little bit. Okay, we'll get back into the Pathfinder line now, and starting off with Blackjack. This is a single-piece humanoid thief-type miniature who's carrying a sword in one hand, and his left hand is outstretched a little bit. Maybe he's grabbing for something. You can see he's mostly wearing just cloth, and he also has a little bit of a kerchief maybe that's covering his face, and a hood that's covering the rest of his head. Not a whole lot of extra equipment or anything. You can make out some details along his belt. He did need a little bit of cleaning. There were some mold lines that were visible running down his left leg, and also in the folds of the cape itself on the right side mostly, so that's a place where you'll just need a steady hand and be careful on cleaning it. Otherwise, nothing really wrong with the miniature. He does seem a little bit plain to me, so I'll probably use him as a NPC bandit or something like that in a Warhammer Fantasy roleplay game, but you could use him as a player character model. It just seems a little bit lackluster to me. Now this next miniature is not lacking for any extra detail or anything. This is Despora Azinrae, and she's a dark elf. She's carrying a pistol crossbow in her right hand and has some extra bolts in her left hand, and all over her armor there's little bits of extra detail and filigree that will need to be picked out when you're painting it. So it might be a little bit of a daunting task to tackle as a paint job, but it's an excellent looking miniature just straight out of the blister pack. There was a little bit of cleaning that was necessary. You can see there's bits of flash down on the end of the crossbow and in a couple other places. There were also visible mold lines, mostly limited to the bottom part of her cape, so they're on a curved surface there, so you just need to carefully trim those away. But overall, it's an excellent looking figure and usable as a player character model, but I'll probably use her as the leader of a unit of Corsairs in my Dark Elf army for Warhammer Fantasy. Okay, and now on to a couple of Chronoscope figures. We have two new zombie survivors. We have Denver and Gallop. Denver from Colorado and Gallop from New Mexico. Both of these guys are carrying shotguns, but Denver is the one that's got the little luggage with the wheels on it that he's carrying behind him. He's got a double-barreled shotgun. He's got a sweat jacket on and jeans and shoes. He looks like a kid. He looks a lot like the kid from Zombieland. And then we've got Gallop, who's got a guitar that is going to fit on his back as a separate piece, or you could leave it off. You don't have to put it on there. He's carrying the pump shotgun and a baseball cap, and also looks like a teenage, kind of maybe college-age kid. He's got his sweat jacket wrapped around his waist, and both of these guys are just making their way through the zombie apocalypse. Okay, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Reaper Minis TV and also close out 2010. Thanks for everybody watching the first year of Reaper Minis TV. We'll see you again starting in January of 2011. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone.